So I'm actually jumping in here for context. I'm getting married tomorrow as of posting this, so I haven't had time to dive into any new topics or anything like that. So the content for this week and the following week are a little bit different while I'm on my honeymoon. There's this video I made a long time ago with the Titanic that I thought could use a little bit more love, and I actually want to dive into this and the whole Titan submarine thing in the future. So please guys enjoy like a 2.5-year-old Scooper of Coop video. I remastered it a little bit, but I wanted to leave it for the most part in its original state. So please let me know if this is something you guys are interested in seeing more about, and enjoy the video.
The Titanic is not a tale of luxury liners and unfortunately timed iceberg. It's a story of deceit, murder, and above all, the battle to control America. Of three men with the power to change history, unknowingly setting sail on a ship doomed to sink. Three men who stood together in opposition of a single piece of legislation, but whose lives and efforts, along with everyone on board that night, were to be cut short because one man would do anything to succeed, including killing more than 1,500 people. And so on the night of April the 14th, 1912, JP Morgan would sleep soundly, knowing his ship, the Titanic, the evidence of his plans, and his three greatest rivals had all made it to their final resting place, miles below the ocean's surface, where they would remain, untouched for eternity. Why JP Morgan would kill 1,500 people to kill three, we have to understand the context of what was happening in America at the time. In 1912, these four men were in a heated battle over what would become the Federal Reserve. And if you don't know what the Fed is or how it works, that's probably because it's only designed to benefit you if you are one of these people. The premise of the Fed is that it bails out the government by printing more money and inflating the currency, which for these people is great because they are the government. But for anyone whose name isn't Michael Obama or Bezos, it means you get screwed for their enjoyment. And although this feels like the norm today, it wasn't always. And this is what Morgan and his friends sought to change with the creation of a Central Bank of America, aka the Federal Reserve. And considering Morgan at the time controlled roughly 90% of America's wealthiest corporations, he had little trouble getting support for his plan. Except for these three men, who oddly enough had a different perspective. John, Ben, and Isidore were each exceptionally wealthy in their own regard. The Guggenheim family fortune is measured in the hundreds of billions today. John was so wealthy that he made most royalty look kinda poor, and Isidore, although he was first gen off the boat, I guarantee you've shopped in one of his stores. So on the outside, it's clear that these men fit the bill for the kind of people who would support Morgan's plan. But on the inside, they each knew it was not just wrong, but corrupt, and could see what it was going to do to America. And because of this, they were ready to fight. So while Morgan was pushing and lobbying for his Federal Reserve, these three men were throwing wrenches. But that would all cease when each of these three men would be tempted into a trip on the world's greatest luxury liner. On April the 14th, 1912, what two men knew was that the Titanic was on fire. These men were JP Morgan, who owned the ship, and J. Bruce Ismay, who we'll get to in a minute. The fire began in the coal storage bunkers about 10 days before the Titanic left on its maiden voyage. And over the course of those 10 days, the fire had spread and begun to melt a large section of the ship's steel hull. Now this is very odd, and normally it's something that would come up in the inspection. And for a ship like the Titanic, the inspection would normally be 2 weeks. But strangely, it would be cut down to less than 5 hours. And what's even weirder is that the inspection team never even set foot in the engine room where the fire was occurring. And if you find it hard to believe me, in a newspaper report after the incident, a man named John Dilly, who worked in the coal room, went on record saying that before the Titanic even set sail, it was on fire, and that the engine room workers had been told by none other than J. Bruce Ismay to stay quiet and tell none of the other crew or passengers. So who is this J. Bruce Ismay? He was the hand-picked president of JP Morgan's White Star Line that owned and operated the Titanic, and was one of the few men to make it off the ship the night it sank. The fire, however, would not be nearly the strangest part of that night. The strangest thing to happen that night would be on the bridge. Captain Edward Smith was headed to bed, leaving in charge his first officer, William Murdoch. But before leaving, Captain Smith would give the eerie order to wake him immediately if there were any concerns, and to under no circumstances take any risks that would jeopardize the trip. And sadly, this order would be ignored. Shortly after Captain Smith went to bed, the bridge would begin to receive warnings from nearby ships that the Titanic was headed into extremely dangerous waters. In total, there would be 6 of these warnings that Murdoch would ignore. Fortunately, the night of April the 14th was clear, the visibility was strong, and despite the key to the binoculars, I can't take this seriously, having been taken, the crow's nest had a solid line of sight. And this is so important because the official narrative is that the spotters didn't see the iceberg until it was too late. Strangely though, Thomas Whiteley, a first-class saloon boy, would hear a much different story. Thomas was the last to leave the Titanic, which is wild in and of itself to think about, and as such ended up on a raft with many of the officers who said that the crow's nest had not only warned Murdoch that icebergs were approaching, but they had warned him 3 times of the very iceberg that the Titanic would later strike. And to make matters even worse, the crow's nest had given Murdoch this warning 30 minutes before the fatal collision. And despite calling 3 times, Murdoch made no adjustment in the 30-minute period before the collision. That was until the very last minute when Murdoch suddenly reversed the engines and turned left in a maneuver to shift around the iceberg. But it came too late, with the iceberg striking the right side of the ship, ripping a wide gash through 5 of its watertight compartments. Now, already this makes Murdoch look really bad, but things only get stranger from here. The spot where the iceberg hit the Titanic just so happened to be the weak point where the coal fire had warped the steel, which leaves us with one possible conclusion. William Murdoch knew where the Titanic was weakest and waited until the last moment so he could guarantee a fatal blow. But why would he do this? Well, truthfully, as I said at the beginning of the video, any evidence of this lies miles below the ocean's surface and might be gone now. But the most logical explanation is that he was forced by J. Bruce Ismay, his direct boss, who was given the order to sink the Titanic by J.P. Morgan. But it would seem that despite what Murdoch had been offered to do this, there was nothing that could account for the 1,500 lives he had just ended. Since shortly after helping load some of the lifeboats, he would add another death to the total, taking his own on the deck of the Titanic. Considering Thomas heard this story from a number of the officers, people at the time took it to be true, and it ended up in a number of newspaper accounts. However, when it came time for the inquest to see what had happened that night, Thomas would never be brought in for questioning, and quickly his story was forgotten and replaced with the narrative we are taught today. What proves JP Morgan sunk the Titanic has nothing to do with his actions on the day in question, but with his inaction in the days prior. You see, John, Benjamin, and Isidore were not the only 3 men meant to be on the Titanic that fateful night. JP Morgan himself had been booked as well, and the day before the trip canceled, claiming to be ill. Now, it's true, people get ill all the time, and that doesn't make them guilty. But what does is when you're seen the day after your ship sets sail across London on a shopping spree with your mistress. Now, I confess that although this is really horrible PR, and it makes it likely Morgan knew, it isn't enough to break the proverbial camel's back. So for the final straw, let's take a look at another man meant to take the trip into the icy Atlantic waters by the name of Alfred Vanderbilt. Alfred Vanderbilt canceled his trip so near to the date the ship left that most of the newspapers after the sinking had reported him as having been on board. And it just so happens, Alfred Vanderbilt was a close friend of JP Morgan and proponent of the Federal Reserve Plan. And in case you think lightning strikes the same place twice, let's turn our attention to Milton Hershey. Yes, that chocolate concocting connoisseur who wrote a check for 2 first-class tickets to White Star Line, then out of the blue decided his business required him and left London 3 days before the Titanic would set sail. And you guessed it, Milton was both a friend of JP Morgan's and a supporter of the Federal Reserve Plan. Now, coincidences are funny because they do happen, but to believe that Morgan and his friends all just so happened to cancel taking a ride on Morgan's death ship would be not only irresponsible, but preposterous, which leaves us with only one possibility, that Morgan not only knew the Titanic was going to sink, but that he sunk it intentionally. And truly, the bow for this entire story is that Morgan won, and the aftermath genuinely reads like the happy ending to a Hallmark movie. For Morgan, not for everyone else in the world. Because with these 3 men out of the way, there was virtually no resistance to the Federal Reserve Act, and less than a year later, it was passed. The Titanic hearings would come to the conclusion that the blame fell on Captain Smith, and that the sinking was an act of God, which I don't know why we blame God for everything. And without the technology to prove otherwise, and a war brewing in Europe, everyone accepted that answer to be true and went on with their lives. Then less than a year after the sinking, Morgan would die, seeing both his empire and legacy secured, and America officially and irreversibly placed into the hands of the elite. Now more than a century later, this tragic tale of murder, greed, and power has become the trite tale of a boat that hit a berg and sunk to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, when in reality, it's so much more. It's proof that hidden just behind the words in our history books, there is so much more to be found. Within every word is a secret, and these secrets have implications for the world we live in today. Just think, had these three men lived, there'd be no Federal Reserve, no Great Depression, no housing crisis, no war on terror, and no Cold War, among countless other things. Had these three men lived, America would be a much better and freer place. It would live up to its reputation as a country with streets paved of gold, rather than streets paved in homeless living and tents pooping on the sidewalk as they shoot heroin. But so long as we keep believing and doing what we're told, the filth-covered streets will be all we have, and the America of hope will be forever a dream just out of reach. I just want to give a quick shout out to this man right here, Ted Logan. He's a super cool dude, and he shouted out my last video, and it was incredible what it did for it. And I want to thank everyone who came and watched my last video and subscribed. It means the world to me. And last but not least, thank you, Chase. None of this is possible without you. Watching that one through boggles my mind every time, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. And seriously, thank you for your understanding, and I really look forward to making some cool stuff with you guys moving forward. That all being said, I'll catch you guys when I'm back. Peace.